These 10 real crime stories are more disturbing than horror movies. Number 1. The Girl in the Locked Room. Kendall Francois Case. In the quiet town of Poughkeepsie, New York, a horror story was unfolding behind the doors of an ordinary-looking house. For years, women had been disappearing, often sex workers, often vulnerable, often dismissed by the public and even law enforcement. Between 1996 and 1998, 8 women went missing. Police treated the disappearances as separate incidents. No one guessed that a serial killer was hiding in plain sight. Kendall Francois was a school hall monitor. Friendly, large, polite. But there was something off about him. He smelled bad, really bad. Co-workers complained about it. His home, which he shared with his parents and sister, reeked of decay. The Francois family explained the smell as plumbing issues. Strangely, no one seemed to look closer. But behind that smell was something far worse. Kendall had been luring sex workers back to his family home and strangling them in his room. He kept the bodies hidden inside the house, stuffing them in crawl spaces, under floorboards, in closets, and even in the attic. His family claimed they never saw a thing. In reality, they may have ignored signs. There were bugs. The smell was unbearable. Neighbors reported the stench. Still, no one connected it to the missing women. The case cracked open in September 1998. One woman, a sex worker named Wendy, had escaped from Kendall. She went to the police and gave them his name and address. When they brought him in, he confessed. Not only that, he walked them through the house and pointed out where each body was hidden. Police found 8 women's remains decomposing inside the Francois home. One body had been there for nearly 2 years. The forensic team had to wear hazmat suits to process the scene. What shocked investigators even more was how Kendall's family lived in the house seemingly unaware. Or were they? The debate still rages to this day. Could you truly live with the smell of death and not suspect anything? Was it denial, fear, or complicity? Kendall Francois pleaded guilty to 8 counts of murder. He avoided the death penalty and was sentenced to life in prison. In 2014, he died from natural causes in a New York State prison at the age of 40. To this day, the case raises disturbing questions. How did no one notice? Why did the authorities not take the missing women's cases more seriously? Would things have been different if the victims were from a different walk of life? The Kendall Francois case isn't just a serial killer story. It's a chilling reminder of how society often looks the other way when the victims are people it deems less important. Number 2. The Craigslist Killer. In 2009, headlines exploded with a story that shook the country. A clean-cut medical student from Boston was being accused of a cold, calculated murder. He wasn't the kind of person you'd expect to be hiding a dark side. But Philip Markoff, handsome, smart, engaged to be married, was hiding a terrifying secret. He was dubbed by the media the Craigslist Killer. It all began in April 2009, when 25-year-old Julissa Brisman, a masseuse advertising her services on Craigslist, was found dead in a Boston hotel room. She had been bludgeoned and shot 3 times. Her bag was missing, and there were no signs of forced entry. Surveillance footage showed her entering the hotel, and then a tall, clean-cut man following her shortly after. Less than a week earlier, another woman had reported a chillingly similar attack. She survived, but she described being bound with plastic zip ties at gunpoint. Her assailant had also arranged the meeting via Craigslist. The Boston police were quick to connect the dots. Multiple attacks, all targeting women offering erotic services through the online classified site. All in upscale hotels. All involving a well-dressed man who seemed harmless enough to let in the door. They tracked his email, then surveillance photos from various hotels, and finally zeroed in on a suspect, 23-year-old Philip Markoff, a student at Boston University School of Medicine. On paper, he was living the perfect life. He was engaged to a woman named Megan McAllister, and they were planning a beach wedding. He had no criminal record, no violent past, no warning signs. When police pulled Markoff over on the highway, they found what amounted to a mobile kill kit, zip ties, duct tape, a loaded handgun, and bullets, the same type used in the murder. A search of his apartment revealed even more damning evidence: a duffel bag containing ammunition, handcuffs, and women's underwear that did not belong to his fiancée. Markoff was charged with Brisman's murder and several attempted robberies. His fiancée initially defended him, claiming the police had made a terrible mistake, but the evidence was overwhelming. Behind bars, Markoff began to unravel. He attempted suicide several times. He wrote Megan's name in blood on his jail cell wall. In 2010, after over a year in custody and awaiting trial, he succeeded in taking his own life using a plastic bag and a makeshift knife. He died alone, never answering the deeper question: why? There was no clear motive. He had no known financial troubles, no history of violence. Was it a thrill? A compulsion? An unspoken rage? We may never know. What makes the case so haunting is how close he was to living a normal life. A future doctor, a wedding on the horizon. But beneath the surface, something monstrous had taken hold, and the internet had given it the perfect hunting ground. Number 3. The Watcher House. In 2014, Derek and Maria Broaddus thought they had found their dream home, a 6-bedroom house at 657 Boulevard in Westfield, New Jersey. The suburban neighborhood was quiet and affluent, and the house was perfect for raising their 3 young children. But just days after they closed on the $1.3 million property, the nightmare began. It started with a letter. Handwritten, no return address. Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard. Allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood. At first, the letter seemed like an odd but harmless greeting. But it quickly turned sinister. The anonymous writer said they had been watching the house for generations, and now that it had called to them, they were eager to observe the new occupants. I am pleased to know your names now and the name of the young blood you have brought to me. The letter mentioned specific details about the Broaddus family. Their names, their children, and even the layout of the home. It ended with a chilling line: "Welcome, my friends. Let the party begin." Terrified, the Broadduses contacted the police. Another letter soon arrived, even more disturbing. The Watcher, as the letter writer called themselves, claimed their family had been tasked with watching the house for decades. They said they'd been waiting for young blood to occupy the house again, and that the Broadduses had no idea what they'd gotten into. The couple was so frightened they never moved in. Instead, they launched a private investigation. They installed security cameras, hired former FBI agents, and even looked into DNA found on one of the envelopes, which turned out to be from a woman. But no clear suspects ever emerged. Suspicion briefly turned toward a neighbor, then to the couple themselves, with some speculating that the letters were a hoax created to get out of a mortgage they couldn't afford. But investigators never found evidence to support either theory. In 2015, the Broadduses sued the previous homeowners, claiming they must have known about the Watcher. The case was dismissed. Meanwhile, more letters kept arriving. Are you one of the Hoboken transplants who are ruining Westfield? The house is crying from all the pain you are causing it. Over the years, the story became a media sensation. In 2018, Netflix purchased the rights to adapt the tale into a fictional series. The Broadduses, still fearful, sold the house in 2019 at a significant loss. To this day, no one knows who the Watcher was. The new owners of 6057 Boulevard have reported no further letters. Was it a real stalker? A cruel prank? A twisted neighbor with a flair for drama? The case remains unsolved, a haunting example of how a perfect life can be upended by a few lines of ink, and the terrifying promise that someone somewhere is always watching. Number 4. The Silent Twins. June and Jennifer Gibbons were born on April 11th, 1963, to Caribbean immigrant parents in Wales. Identical twins, they seemed inseparable from birth. But their bond quickly grew into something far more unusual, even disturbing. By the age of 3, it was clear that June and Jennifer were different. They barely spoke to anyone, not even their parents or siblings. But between themselves, they communicated in a fast, private language that no one else could understand. It wasn't just a twin connection. It was as if they lived in a world entirely their own. Their behavior became more alarming as they grew older. They mirrored each other's movements, walked in perfect sync, and often refused to speak at all in the presence of others. Teachers tried to separate them in school to encourage independence, but it only made things worse. June and Jennifer would become catatonic or deeply distressed when apart. When together, they were locked in an eerie, obsessive companionship. Eventually, the girls were withdrawn from mainstream education and given therapy, but even trained professionals couldn't crack their silence. The only place their voices appeared was in their journals and stories. They spent hours writing dark fiction, filled with themes of crime, death, and despair. In one story, a boy is seduced by his teacher, then murdered by her husband. In another, people are possessed or driven mad. In their teenage years, things took a darker turn. They began engaging in petty crimes, vandalism, shoplifting, even arson. Their writings reflected their descent into chaos. In 1981, at age 18, they were arrested for setting fire to a local technical college and a nearby store. Rather than go to jail, the twins were committed to Broadmoor Hospital, a high-security psychiatric facility known for housing the criminally insane. At Broadmoor, they were diagnosed with psychotic disorders, though many believed their behavior stemmed more from their bond than from true illness. They were kept there for 11 years. During this time, they grew even more withdrawn and depressed. Doctors began to notice something deeply unsettling. It seemed as though one twin had to die for the other to live. By the early 1990s, the girls had made a pact. One of them, they never said who would have to sacrifice her life so the other could be free. In 1993, they were scheduled for transfer to a lower security facility. On the day of the move, Jennifer suddenly collapsed in June's lap and never woke up. She died of acute myocarditis, inflammation of the heart. There were no drugs in her system, no underlying conditions, just death, as if willed into existence. After Jennifer's death, June began to speak freely for the first time in her life. She was released from psychiatric care and went on to live a relatively quiet life. But she has never fully explained what happened or why Jennifer died that day. The story of the silent twins remains one of the most bizarre and haunting cases in psychiatric history. A tale of identity, obsession, and a bond so powerful it bordered on the supernatural. Number 5. The Hinter Kek murders. In the isolated woods of Bavaria, Germany, nestled on a small farmstead known as Hinter Kek, one of the most chilling unsolved murder cases in European history, occurred in 6 people were brutally killed with a mattock, a pickaxe-like farming tool, and the killer may have stayed in the home for days after. Andreas and Celia Gruber lived on the farm with their widowed daughter Victoria Gabriel, her 2 young children, Celia 7 and Joseph 2, and their maid Maria Baumgartner. Life on the farm was difficult and solitary, but nothing could prepare the family for what would happen in the final days of March. About a week before the murders, Andreas noticed strange signs around the property. Footprints in the snow led from the forest to the house, but none led back. Keys went missing. They heard footsteps in the attic, and their newspaper vanished. Even their previous maid had left months earlier, claiming the home was haunted. On March 31, 1922, something terrible happened. The exact sequence of events remains unclear, but it's believed that Andreas, Cecilia, his granddaughter, Victoria, and the elder Cecilia were lured one by one into the barn, where they were slaughtered. Then the killer entered the home and murdered 2-year-old Joseph in his crib, and the new maid Maria, who had just arrived that day, in her room. The bodies weren't discovered until 4 days later, when neighbors noticed no one had been seen from the farm. Upon arrival, they found a scene that shocked even seasoned investigators. The bodies were piled in the barn and partially covered with hay. Joseph and Maria were found inside. The tool used for the murders was never definitively found, but a pickaxe, possibly the murder weapon, was later discovered in the attic. What truly disturbed investigators was what had occurred after the murders. The cows had been fed, the chimney showed signs of recent use, and meals had been eaten. It appeared that the killer had stayed in the house with the corpses, possibly for days. One neighbor even reported seeing smoke rising from the chimney during the weekend after the murders. Despite a massive investigation involving over 100 suspects and interviews with townspeople, no one was ever arrested. Suspicion swirled around Victoria's relationship with her father, Andreas. There was evidence of incest, and Josef's father was never identified. Some believe the murders were committed by someone who knew the family well, maybe even out of revenge. Forensics in 1922 were primitive. By the time the police arrived, the crime scene had been contaminated by curious neighbors and local authorities. Clues were lost, and the case grew colder by the year. In a final macabre twist, the heads of the victims were removed during autopsy and sent to Munich for examination. During World War II, they were lost, possibly destroyed, and never recovered. To this day, the victims remain buried without their heads. The Hinter Kek murders continue to haunt Germany. The remote farm was demolished in the years after. But the legend persists, a terrifying reminder that sometimes the monster is already inside the house. Number 6. The Boy in the Box. On a cold February day in 1957, a man checking his muskrat traps in Fox Chase, Philadelphia, came across something odd, a large cardboard box in the woods. Inside was the body of a young boy, naked, bruised, and wrapped in a flannel blanket. His hair had been crudely chopped, and his small body was covered in cuts and contusions. There were no fingerprints, no name, no missing persons report. Just a lifeless child, alone in the woods. He was estimated to be between 4 and 6 years old. He weighed only 30 pounds, malnourished and underdeveloped. The box he was found in had once held a baby's bassinet, sold by J.C. Penney. Detectives canvassed local stores and hospitals. No one recognized him. Flyers were printed and posted on telephone poles and handed out to every house within miles. The case became known as America's Unknown Child. The investigation quickly hit dead ends. Hundreds of leads were followed. Every orphanage, school, and foster home in the area was contacted. No matches. The police even dressed a mannequin in similar clothes, posed it in lifelike positions, and displayed it publicly in hopes someone would come forward. No one did. Years passed, decades. The boy was buried in a pauper's grave, marked only by a small plaque. Still, the story haunted the city. Who was he? How could a child vanish with no one missing him? In the 1990s, the case caught a second wind, thanks to a group of volunteers known as the Vidocq Society. Retired detectives, profilers, and forensic experts dedicated to solving cold cases. They exhumed the boy's body in 1998 to extract DNA from his remains. A genetic profile was built, but without any close matches in the national database, the boy remained unidentified. Over the years, wild theories emerged. Was he the victim of a child trafficking ring? An illegitimate child hidden from the public? A runaway punished to death? One of the most compelling leads came from a woman who claimed her mother had purchased the boy from his birth family and then murdered him in a fit of rage. She described details not made public, but inconsistencies in her story and lack of evidence led investigators to dismiss the account. It wasn't until 2022, 65 years later, that the mystery finally cracked. Using advanced genetic genealogy, the same technology that caught the Golden State Killer, investigators identified the boy as Joseph Augustus Zarelli, born in 1953 in West Philadelphia. His parents were finally named, though authorities declined to publicly identify them due to privacy reasons. Investigators believe Joseph was never officially reported missing because of a turbulent family situation. The identity of his killer, however, remains unknown. Though we now know his name, the story of the boy in the box is still heartbreaking. For decades he was forgotten, nameless, a symbol of the lost and voiceless. Today his gravestone has been changed to bear his real name, Joseph Augustus Zarelli. But justice is still waiting. Number 7. The Killer Nurse, Charles Cullen. For 16 years, Charles Cullen worked as a nurse in hospitals across New Jersey and Pennsylvania. He was soft-spoken, intelligent, and rarely drew attention to himself. But behind the kind smile and scrubs was one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. A man who admitted to murdering at least 40 patients, though the actual number could be more than 400. Cullen's career began in 1987 at St. Barnabas Medical Center in Livingston, New Jersey. Almost immediately, patients began dying unexpectedly. In one case, a judge recovering from an allergic reaction suddenly coded and died. Tests later showed a lethal dose of insulin in his system, despite no reason for such medication. That became Cullen's pattern. He would inject patients with deadly doses of insulin or digoxin, a heart medication. Drugs that, in small doses, are life-saving. In larger amounts, they are fatal. Cullen moved frequently. Every time suspicious deaths began to pile up, he either resigned or was asked to leave. Yet shockingly, no criminal charges ever followed him. Hospitals simply wanted him gone, not sued. Part of what made Cullen so dangerous was his access. As a nurse, he was trusted. No one questioned when he entered a patient's room or adjusted IV lines. Many of his victims weren't even terminally ill. Some were on the road to recovery. Cullen chose at random. Sometimes he claimed it was mercy. Other times he gave no explanation at all. By the early 2000s, Cullen was working at Somerset Medical Center. When healthy patients began dying mysteriously, a fellow nurse, Amy Loughran, started to grow suspicious. She noticed that Cullen often accessed patient charts he wasn't assigned to, and deaths followed. Amy, at great personal risk, began wearing a wire for investigators. With her help, police gathered enough evidence to confront Cullen. In December 2003, he was arrested. Initially quiet and defensive, Cullen eventually confessed, and the scale of his crimes stunned authorities. He named victims across 10 different hospitals and claimed he couldn't even remember most of their names. Some had died from digoxin, others from insulin, and some by medications they had never been prescribed. Cullen's motive remains murky. He often said he wanted to end suffering, painting himself as a mercy killer. But his victims' families and the facts suggest otherwise. Many patients weren't suffering. Some were improving. Some were children. There was no mercy, just control and quiet malice. In 2006, Charles Cullen was sentenced to 11 consecutive life sentences. He will never be eligible for parole. His case sparked national outrage and led to changes in hospital reporting laws. It exposed a dangerous loophole in the healthcare system, how institutions were more concerned about liability than justice. Cullen was allowed to move from hospital to hospital, killing all the while. Today, Charles Cullen sits in a New Jersey prison, but the full number of his victims may never be known. He was the perfect predator, invisible in plain sight, hiding behind a nurse's badge and a deadly syringe. Number 8. The Disappearance of Mora Murray. On February 9, 2004, 21-year-old nursing student Mora Murray vanished after crashing her car on a rural road in Woodsville, New Hampshire. In the 2 decades since, her disappearance has become one of the most baffling and discussed missing persons cases in modern history, spawning endless speculation, documentaries, Reddit threads, and even FBI involvement. Yet no one has seen Mora since. Mora was a bright, athletic student from Massachusetts, enrolled at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. She was studying nursing and had a seemingly stable life. Though in the days leading up to her disappearance, cracks began to appear. On February 5th, she received a phone call that left her deeply shaken. A supervisor at her campus job reported she had broken down in tears and was out of it. 2 days later, she crashed her father's car on her way back to campus. She was reportedly distraught, but not seriously injured. Then on February 9th, she suddenly emailed professors and her work supervisor, claiming there had been a death in her family, a lie, and that she would be gone for a few days. Mora packed up her dorm room, withdrew cash from an ATM, and bought alcohol. She left Amherst around 4:30 p.m. and drove north toward New Hampshire. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. Around 7:30 p.m., a local woman in Haverhill, NH, called 911 after hearing a loud crash. Mora's black Saturn had skidded off the icy road into a snowbank. When a school bus driver stopped to check on her, Mora said she was fine and that she'd already called AAA, but there was no cell service in the area and no record of such a call. By the time police arrived, Mora was gone. Her car was locked, the windshield cracked, and there was an open box of wine inside. Her belongings, textbooks, clothes, snacks, were still in the vehicle. There were no footprints in the snow leading away from the car. No sign of a struggle, no indication of where she had gone. And then, nothing. Search dogs picked up a faint scent that stopped abruptly a short distance down the road, suggesting she may have gotten into another vehicle, but no one came forward. No surveillance footage was ever found. And despite search efforts involving helicopters, cadaver dogs, and hundreds of volunteers, no trace of Mora was ever found. Over the years, theories have flooded in. Did she stage her own disappearance to start over? Was she meeting someone secretly? Did she fall victim to foul play in the freezing wilderness? Was she picked up by a stranger or someone she knew? Some speculate she was running from something, possibly legal trouble, academic pressures, or personal trauma. Others believe she may have succumbed to the elements while trying to avoid detection after the crash. In 2021, human remains were found near the area, but DNA confirmed they were not Mora's. To this day, Mora Murray's disappearance remains unsolved. She was last seen standing beside her crashed car, and in the time it took for police to arrive, she simply vanished into the night. Number 9. The Girl in the Suitcase. Valerie Reyes Case. On January 29, 2019, 24-year-old Valerie Reyes was reported missing by her family after she failed to show up for work at a bookstore in East Harlem, New York. She hadn't answered texts or calls in over 24 hours, which was unlike her. But what disturbed her mother the most was a conversation they had just days before. Valerie had told her, with unusual fear in her voice, "Mom, I'm scared. I feel like something bad is going to happen to me. Someone's going to murder me." 8 days later, Valerie's body was discovered inside a red suitcase, dumped off the side of a rural road in Greenwich, Connecticut, miles from where she lived. The suitcase had been tossed down a wooded embankment. When investigators opened it, they found her wrapped in plastic and bound with packing tape, her hands and feet tied. She had been beaten and suffocated. There were no immediate suspects. Valerie didn't have any known enemies, and no recent public conflicts. But investigators soon turned their attention to her past, and especially to her recent breakup with Javier da Silva, a 24-year-old Venezuelan national who had once dated Valerie and had overstayed his visa. Surveillance footage revealed the key break. Da Silva was seen driving Valerie's car the day after she was last seen. "Mom, I'm scared. I feel like something bad is going to happen to me. Someone's going to murder me." 8 days later, Valerie's body was discovered inside a red suitcase, dumped off the side of a rural road in Greenwich, Connecticut, miles from where she lived. The suitcase had been tossed down a wooded embankment. When investigators opened it, they found her wrapped in plastic and bound with packing tape, her hands and feet tied. She had been beaten and suffocated. There were no immediate suspects. Valerie didn't have any known enemies, and no recent public conflicts. But investigators soon turned their attention to her past, and especially to her recent breakup with Javier da Silva, a 24-year-old Venezuelan national who had once dated Valerie and had overstayed his visa. Surveillance footage revealed the key break. Da Silva was seen driving Valerie's car the day after she was last seen. He had used her debit card at an ATM, withdrawing $1,000 in cash from her account. And most damning of all, he used her phone to send misleading messages to family and friends, to make it seem like she was still alive. When questioned, Da Silva quickly cracked. He told FBI agents that during a visit to her apartment, they had gotten into a fight. He claimed Valerie fell and hit her head during an argument, but rather than seek help, he admitted to tying her up and placing her in a suitcase while she was still alive. Da Silva then drove across state lines with Valerie in the trunk of his car. She suffocated inside the suitcase. He dumped it off the road in Connecticut and tried to cover his tracks but left a digital trail too large to hide. His phone records, ATM withdrawals, and surveillance footage painted a picture of calculated coldness. In fact, Da Silva had even attempted to use Valerie's credit card days after her death. What had once seemed like a tragic accident became clear. This was a premeditated and brutal murder. During sentencing in 2022, Da Silva expressed remorse, but the judge called the crime heinous and senseless. He was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison. The case shook many because Valerie had known something bad was coming. Her final days were marked by anxiety and fear, a gut feeling that someone she had once trusted could turn violent. In the end, her instincts were right. Valerie Reyes's story is a haunting reminder. Sometimes the greatest threats don't come from strangers, but from people we once let into our lives. Number 10. The Isdall Woman. On November 29, 1970, a father and his daughters were hiking near the remote Isdall Valley, just outside of Bergen, Norway, when they stumbled upon a gruesome discovery: the charred body of a woman, hidden among rocks, her face burned beyond recognition. Her arms were curled up in what investigators described as a boxing pose, a typical sign of death by intense heat. What followed would become one of Norway's most chilling and enduring mysteries: the case of the Isdall woman. At the scene, detectives found bizarre clues: bottles of gasoline, charred food wrappers, and an empty St. Halvard liqueur bottle. Nearby, hidden in a crevice, were personal belongings: a watch, a pair of earrings, and clothing, all with the labels deliberately removed. Her fingerprints had been sandpapered off. The body showed no clear cause of death, but the autopsy found 50-70 sleeping pills in her system and soot in her lungs, suggesting she was alive when the fire started. But was it suicide, or something far more sinister? As the police investigated, the case only grew stranger. 2 suitcases were soon discovered at the Bergen railway station linked to the woman. Inside were more clothes with missing tags, wigs, a notepad with cryptic phrases and codes, prescription-free glasses, and cosmetics. They also found money from multiple countries: German, Norwegian, Belgian, and British currency. One suitcase had a fingerprint that matched the corpse, confirming it was hers. Still, no passport, no ID, no real name. Interviews with hotel staff and travel records revealed that the woman had traveled across Norway using at least 8 different aliases, registering at hotels under names like Fenella Lork and Alexia Zarna Merches. She often requested a room with a balcony and changed rooms frequently. She sometimes spoke in broken English or French and appeared secretive, even paranoid. She wore wigs in public, used coded language in her notepad, and often told hotel staff she was a traveling antiques dealer. But the more police learned, the more they suspected she was a spy, possibly working for a foreign intelligence agency during the Cold War. Witnesses claimed she met with men in suits, sometimes argued with strangers, and had a military bearing. But no country ever came forward to claim her. No missing persons report matched her description. No family ever contacted authorities. She had vanished into thin air, and now burned, nameless and unclaimed, she was gone. Despite decades of international coverage and theories ranging from Soviet espionage to secret intelligence missions, her identity remains unknown. In 2016, Norwegian journalists and scientists exhumed her remains and performed DNA testing and isotope analysis. Results showed she likely grew up in southern or central Europe, possibly Germany or France. Facial reconstructions were created and shared with the public, but still, no matches. To this day, the Isdall woman is buried in Bergen with a small plaque, her grave reading simply, "Unknown woman, found dead in Isdalen, 29 November 1970. The mystery continues to fascinate. A ghost of the Cold War era, whose secrets were taken by fire, silence, and time.